Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Ann-Kathrin Arndt, Beausetha Bruwer, Sarah Volknant, and Zhicheng Huang will talk about teacher professional identity development.
Today, we will talk about understanding ourselves as inclusive teachers and about how we develop our professional identity as a teacher. Teacher professional identity is complex and should be treated as an ongoing process. To better understand this topic, we will now delve into the perspectives of two students, an experienced teacher, a social worker, as well as two researchers.
Leah, thank you for joining us. Can you please tell us, what does teacher professional identity mean to you?
So I think I will develop my teacher professional identity in my teaching, and that it will be in a constant change. Because I think there is not one teacher professional identity, but it depends on the context I'm in. So it depends on the learners I have, of the school, the district, the school system, or in my case also in Germany, the state I'm in. And of course, my teacher professional identity connects to my personal identity, so they are in sync. I believe that a teacher, in order to build a relationship with the children, needs to be authentic. For example, if I'm in an internship and my mentor is really strict, but I'm more empathetic listener maybe, and I think, but I have to do it like my mentor, I think that won't work. So it needs to be my own values and my own identity.
Thank you. How is your identity connected to the way you want to be as a teacher one day?
So, as I just said, I think the teacher professional identity is connected to my own identity in the way that they have to go together. And so I think my values are important. The values I have and the values I have regarding my teaching. For example, empathy, open-mindedness, humor, creativity, respect, trust, honesty, to just name a few. So I think these are the values I find important regarding my future teaching. And they will be the base to which my teacher identity will connect with.
And these will reflect in how you will teach.
Yes.
So. And what are the three most important influences for you, for your identity as a teacher?
So before studying education, I studied history, and in my thesis I worked on the history of the German special needs schools in the Nazi regime, and that influenced me in the way I look on at the special needs schools and therefore also inclusion. And secondly would be being part of this project of All Means All in the past 2 years, meeting all of these people with their inspiring ideas and about inclusion. And the third one, also quite important, is having a child of my own. It's a huge influence also.
Thank you very much, Leah.
Thanks.
So thank you, Anna, for joining us today. We are really excited to know a bit more. What does teacher identity mean to you?
Thank you. When I hear teacher professional identity, I think about being a teacher as one role of my identity. And as the various roles of my identity are interconnected, what makes me being a teacher professional is being reflective and aware of the autonomies a teacher has to cope with.
Thank you so much. You already mentioned the connection between your identity and the way you want to be as a teacher. Maybe you can expand a little bit on this.
My identity is connected to being a teacher, especially in terms of the inclusive values I carry with me.
Thank you so much. And what are the 3 most important influences for your identity as a teacher? And it might be hard to decide, but...
Yeah, I have to think about many things, but what most influenced my identity as a teacher, I would say, are the experiences I did in communication and community practices. The second one, I would choose understanding myself as a lifelong learner. And the last one I would choose from the many is learning about intersectionality.
Thank you so much.
We will now talk to an experienced teacher. Thank you for being here, Cynthia. First of all, I'd like to ask you, what does teacher professional identity mean to you?
Every profession has its own identity, and teacher professional identity to me means really the positioning of the individual who takes a decision to become a teacher in that teaching profession. For example, knowing that you are a facilitator of knowledge, that you will be dealing with young people, children, adults, or wherever, at whatever level of the teaching you chose to operate, and that you'll be acting in local parentage and mentoring these people that you are, with whom you are facilitating the knowledge. So basically, your identity is the work that you do and how you handle yourself. The same way you would enter a hospital and know, oh, that person must be a nurse, whether it is by their conduct or by their uniform. Similarly, we as teachers have a particular identity. When you walk into a school, you'll know that could be a parent, but I think that is the teacher.
Thank you so much. What would you say? Has your identity as a teacher changed throughout the years that you've been working as a teacher? And if so, how did it change?
Yes, my identity changed a lot because when I started teaching way back, teachers were we were practicing more teacher-centered education. And school structures were also designed in such a way that the teacher would be in front and they would be the holders of knowledge. Even if already in 1967, Paulo Freire already talked about the issue of banking and viewing learners as sponges that should just take up the knowledge. Until the 90s, we were still thinking that way and doing things as if learners are only sponges. Then the changes came in terms of shifting to learner-centered education, to inclusive education. And recently with COVID, we got a shock of our life to shift from the physical classrooms that we knew and having a teacher present in a classroom to blended learning. So if a teacher doesn't change, then they cannot remain a teacher because you have to adjust to the circumstances where you are.
And what would you say are the 3 most important influences for your identity as a teacher?
Again, it has to do with positioning because I always continued to position myself as a teacher. And so the first thing to me was always continuing professional development because I realized that I cannot come in a classroom in the 21st century with 19th century skills, for example. So the first one definitely was continuing professional development. And then another one that is related to that is conferences and research, because I realized that I needed to grow if I'm to survive in this environment. And thirdly, I think the biggest one was adaptability, because the longer you are in the profession, the more you start to experience a generation gap. And if you are, for example, above 50 in the teaching profession and you are teaching people who are maybe 20, 18, 19, then you have to adapt to them, to their needs, to their dress code, to the slang that they use. And hey, I learned those things, the words they use, and I use them, and they are impressed, like, whoa, you also know. Yes, I do.
Thank you so much for your insight, Cynthia.
Multidisciplinary teams are central to inclusive education. That is why we are also interested in learning more about the identity of other professionals. Mardula, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you please tell us, what does professional identity mean to you as a social worker working in inclusive education?
So thanks a lot. So although I'm doing my PhD and I'm a researcher and my work is in inclusive education for students with disabilities in India, but I'm also a trained social worker and I have been working in the field of disability rights for a while. So I feel that the very core of our existence of human civilization lies in education, and that's where I feel that a good curriculum, a good learning, schooling, it's very core for us to know about empathy, of understanding, and all the values that really make us truly human and ensure a safe and a secular space for everyone. So that's the understanding with which I approach my field and I approach people.
Can you tell us, how is your identity connected to the work you are doing?
I would like to point out that even though I do not identify as a person with disabilities, but my work primarily deals with the same. But I would like to say that it is not always about my identity as much as a privilege it is, and it is to be acknowledged. But at the same time, I also realize that at the end of the day, it is how you approach and how you look at it that is what matters. So it has to be with a certain sensibility and a certain sensitivity and empathy that is required, and understanding about what are the issues at hand. And that's really how it works. Thank you.
Okay. What are the 3 most important influences for your identity as a social worker?
Thank you so much for asking me. I think it's a very important question as well. So I would really thank my parents because they work in civil society and political causes, and that's, I think, I primarily draw them as being my inspiration. Another thing I would say was my school. In India, it's not really common for a lot of schools to indulge in community services, even though maybe now it is. But my school always had this political thought and a social consciousness they provided me with a platform. I would also like to acknowledge that I was there in this school as a scholarship kid on a merit scholarship as well. So despite my background, they always encouraged me and they provided me with all the platforms that were necessary and the leadership opportunities as well to head the Rotary Club or the community service club as well. And there was literacy mission that we were involved with. There was a project called as Adopt the Grant that was there, and there were a lot of these such initiatives. So 2 of my primary socialization agents were responsible for this for me.
Thank you very much.
So we have now learned a lot from first-hand experience, but we are also very interested in the research perspective. Luckily, Victor is here with us, so thank you so much for joining us to talk a little bit of one of your latest research paper. So what does teacher professional identity mean to you, based on your research?
So my research was conducted to look into the professional identity of a special needs teacher. So the research was conducted to measure the roles and responsibilities of a teacher versus the professional identification.
That's interesting. And are there certain changes concerning the teacher professional identity and the relation you just mentioned over time?
So when we look at teachers' identity, so I think general per se, anybody can be a teacher. But when we look at professional identity-wise, I think only a trained teacher can be a teacher. So as part of my research, we looked into the roles and responsibilities of teachers, special need teachers, and support teachers in both the UK context and the Singapore context. And we found that there's no different, literally no different at all, between their roles and responsibilities. So I think it all boils down to the types of students that they teach, which actually defines them whether they're teachers or they're special needs teachers.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting and also somehow striking that there were no differences, right? Yeah. And you mentioned before that you have, in your research, identified one very important influence for developing teacher professional identity. So, of course, we are very curious to learn a bit more about this.
So, I think that's a good question to ask. So, when we looked at, at least when I looked at the number of factors involved, we found that the low clarity of roles actually contributed a lot to the dissonance between teachers' identity. So we found, I found that the longer the teacher is in the profession, the less they associate with the identity. I think part of it was because they just play such a variety of roles. Teachers nowadays, they're required to perform so many different things, which, in all honesty, may not be part of teaching. So, the role of a teacher is just simply getting more and more complex over time.
So this was very interesting. Can you maybe expand a little bit on this?
Okay, so where I come from, at least, or where I worked before, we have this saying of that it takes a village to raise a child. So I think teachers, not just teachers, policymakers, organizations, and teachers themselves need to realize that that they're not Superman, they're not Wonder Woman, they cannot do everything. I think it's important to engage different stakeholders in the environment because if the importance of the role is in the task that you carry out, teachers need to understand their role, and teachers need to find value in the role that they play in the child's life. So they should not adopt and play every other role that other stakeholders are required to also put in their part.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting to learn a bit more about also the connection in the multidisciplinary team, but also about I understood, recognition of the importance in the children's life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Developing professional teacher identity for inclusion is always dependent on the context that you're in. As a prominent advocate for inclusive education in China, can you, Professor Huang, please elaborate on this from your perspective?
Yes. In China, we do a lot of teaching training in service for the primary school teachers and secondary school teachers. But we put more attention to the teachers' professional development, not teachers' professional identity development. These two words some different. For us, the teachers' professional development means put more attention to the subject teaching, how to do better subject teaching, just technically. For example, for some mathematical teachers, they only thinking about how can do the best teaching in mathematics. For this reason, I think there are some relation with the Chinese educational tradition, because China have a long history and a long educational tradition. This tradition put more attention to learn book knowledge. That means learn the knowledge from books. Also, we practice the put more attention to the examination. Every day we have, for the students, have examination. So teacher teach the knowledge and students learn the knowledge. So in China, in the school exist many competition between teacher and teacher, between students and students, exist strong competition. The criteria of evaluation of quality of education just is how many students can go to the top universities. You see, if your school prepare many students go to top university, that means you have your school have good quality of education. About the teacher professional identity development. In this sentence, the teacher means inclusive teacher. That is very important for us because in China, no many teachers know the inclusive education. Only in the area of special education, they know something about inclusive education. So we need more and more teachers know the conception of the inclusive education. So we also give the teachers lessons, trainings about what is inclusive education. More important is let the teachers accept and agree with the concept of inclusive education. If they can accept the new concept of inclusive education, there will be due practice in the school. We also need the teacher recognize the identity of the teacher. So if every teachers have some idea about the inclusive education, they can develop their teacher professional identities. So this TPID is very important for Chinese teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now we have heard the perspectives of various individuals, and one question that remains still to answer is, why is it important to develop teacher professional identity? Anke, can you elaborate on this?
Yes. So as you mentioned, we heard a lot of aspects, so it's not possible to give like a brief summary here, but I guess throughout all the interviews, it became clear that the way you understand yourself as a teacher influences the way you engage with students. And this is not only important concerning like a narrow view on outcomes like achievement, but also for the student well-being. We heard about the engagement with the communities, with the families. So overall, it refers back to this idea that inclusive education is not only about a technical change, short-term, but about a transformation. And for this transformation, developing your teacher professional identity is one important foundation. In the interviews, we learned a lot about the complexity of teacher professional identity. For example, we heard about the need for adaptability throughout the life course, also with the intergenerational differences and keeping up with your students. But we also learned about the influences of the context For example, the tradition in education and the shifts in the tradition related to a broader understanding of inclusive education, in contrast, for example, to teaching or education being focused on exams or book knowledge. And we learned that in this context dependency, teacher professional identity is situated in the interplay of the professional, the personal, and the political dimensions. So we heard a lot about the interconnectedness of your personal values, but also your political engagement, also your own experience, for example, in the schools or in your family. Overall, this means that teacher professional identity is not static, but it changes over time. And it's important to focus on developing teacher professional identity, for example, in initial teacher education, but also through conferences, through formats of continuous professional development to align who I am with what I do.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.